On the Untold Case, we cover the cases the world got wrong, and this one, nobody saw coming. A man went to a website, found a stranger, told him to bring a knife and restraints, told him not to stop even if she screamed for help. And that stranger had absolutely no idea he was not going to a fantasy. He was going to his own murder. His name was Joseph Ryan. He was 39 years old. He worked in Washington, D.C. He had a mother who called him her confidant, her biggest ally, her cheerleader. And he died in a bedroom in Virginia, shot in the head, framed for a murder he did not commit. The man who set the trap was a federal IRS agent named Brendan Banfield, and the woman he murdered to set it was his own wife. To understand what happened on February 24th, 2023, you need to understand who Brendan Banfield was and who he pretended to be. A federal career as a criminal investigation agent for the IRS, a suburban home in Herndon, Virginia, a quiet commuter town 20 miles from Washington, D.C., a 4-year-old daughter, and a wife named Christine. Christine Banfield was a pediatric ICU nurse, the kind of person who spent her days keeping sick children alive. Her friends called her an angel on earth. Her childhood best friend described her laugh as one of her favorite sounds in the world. By every account, Christine was devoted to her patients, to her daughter, to her marriage. What she did not know was that her husband had been having affairs for years. Not one affair, multiple. One woman came forward and said she met Brendan Banfield in 2013 on a sugar baby website. They had a relationship that lasted a year. They met at hotels. They met in the Banfield home while Christine was away. That was 2013, a decade before Christine died. Brendan Banfield had been living a double life for as long as Christine had known him. But before we get to Juliana, you need to know who Christine really was. Because Christine Banfield was not just a wife in a marriage that was falling apart. She was someone who had built an entire life around saving others. She worked in the pediatric intensive care unit, the ICU for children, the floor where parents sit in waiting rooms not knowing if their child is going to make it through the night. Christine was the person on the other side of that door, working the machines, watching the monitors, holding the line between a child and the worst possible outcome. Her childhood best friend, Lucille Priolo, described her laugh as one of her favorite sounds in the world. She said Christine was honest, faithful, caring, compassionate, an angel on earth. Christine had no idea her husband had been leading a completely separate life since at least 2013. She had no idea about the sugar baby website. The hotel meetings, the woman who had sat in her own home while she was away. She went to work every day saving children's lives and came home to a man who had already decided she needed to die. And then there is Joseph Ryan. The world learned his name because of how he died, because of what he was accused of before the truth came out. His family watched him be described in courtrooms and news reports as someone who had gone to a house to commit violence. That was not who Joseph Ryan was. His mother, Deirdre Fisher, described him as her confidant, her biggest ally, her cheerleader, the person she called when things went wrong and when things went right. People who knew him from the FetLife community, investigators spoke to them, described him as someone who respected consent, who communicated clearly, who was not violent, who understood the difference between fantasy and reality. He matched with Anastasia 9 the way adults in that community match with each other, through conversation, through establishing what both people wanted, through what he believed was mutual agreement. He drove to that house in good faith. He brought a knife because he was asked to. He was shot in the head within moments of entering that bedroom. And for months, his name was attached to a crime he did not commit. His mother said at sentencing, "What I hope is that even for a moment, the world will say Joe meant more than nothing, that he was someone worthy of dignity in life." He was, and the person who made sure the world would never know that was Brendan Banfield. Now here is the question that has never been fully answered about this case. How did Brendan Banfield convince a 21-year-old woman, far from home in a foreign country working as a nanny, to help him murder 2 people? Juliana Perez Magalhães had arrived in America with a simple purpose. She was an au pair. She cared for a 4-year-old girl. She lived with a family in suburban Virginia. 10 months after she moved in, Brendan Banfield started a relationship with her. He told her things that a vulnerable young woman far from her family wants to hear. That he wanted to marry her. That he wanted children with her. That she was the person he had been waiting for. And then, very slowly, he introduced the idea. He did not walk up to her one day and say, "Help me kill my wife." It does not work that way. It never works that way. He started by telling her about Christine, that Christine was lazy, that Christine was not a good mother, that Christine was the obstacle between them and everything they could have together. He planted seeds, let them grow, watched Juliana absorb the version of Christine he was constructing, a version that bore almost no resemblance to the pediatric nurse saving children's lives down the hall. And then in October 2022, he said it directly. He needed to get rid of her. Juliana later told investigators she did not immediately agree, that she was horrified, that she tried to talk him out of it. She went to the shooting range with him in November, and again in December. By January, she was helping him type messages to Joseph Ryan on Christine's laptop, while Christine slept in the next room. At trial, her defense argued she was manipulated, that she was isolated, that she was a young immigrant woman in love with the only person she knew in America, that Brendan Banfield had spent months reshaping her understanding of reality until murder felt like the only path forward. The prosecution argued she was a willing participant who made choices at every step and could have stopped it at any point. The judge who sentenced her called it the most serious manslaughter scenario the court had ever seen, and sentenced her to 10 years, rejecting the prosecution's recommendation of time served. She will serve approximately 4 years with credit for time served and good behavior. 4 years for helping plan and execute a double murder. Whether that is justice is something people are still arguing about. And while Juliana sat in a cell waiting for her deal to be finalized, Brendan Banfield was still free. For a full year after Christine's murder, he walked around Herndon, Virginia as a widower, a grieving husband, a federal agent who had heroically shot an intruder to protect his wife, and tragically lost her anyway. He attended Christine's funeral. He spoke about her. He collected the sympathy of people who had no idea what he had done in that bedroom. And Juliana, the woman he had pulled into this, moved into the primary bedroom, the room where Christine died. She replaced Christine's photographs with her own. She hung her clothes in Christine's closet. She put her lingerie in Christine's drawers. Investigators came back 8 months later with a second search warrant and found all of it exactly as described. Not a single photograph of Christine remained in that house. The detective who walked through that bedroom told 2020 Juliana had effectively replaced Christine. That image of a woman moving into the bedroom where she helped murder the previous occupant is the detail that tells you everything you need to know about what Brendan Banfield had built around himself. There is one more detail about the FetLife account that has never been properly reported. Joseph Ryan was not the only man they messaged. Brendan and Juliana spent weeks on that website. They had conversations with multiple users before Ryan. They were looking for specific qualities. Someone who would agree to come to the house, bring a weapon, and follow instructions without asking too many questions. They rejected men who wanted to meet in public first, men who wanted to verify identity, men who had conditions or limits. They were filtering for someone who would simply show up. Joseph Ryan was the one who said yes. Think about what that means. There were other men who do not know their names were ever in those messages, who came one conversation away from driving to that house instead. In October 2021, the Banfields hired an au pair. Her name was Juliana Perez Magalhaes. She was 21 years old. She had come from Brazil. She moved into the Banfield home and became the full-time caretaker of their 4-year-old daughter. Within 10 months, she and Brendan were sleeping together. But there was a problem. Divorce was not an option. Not because he loved Christine, but because if he divorced her, she would walk away with more money than him, and he would lose the custody battle for his daughter. He had done the math. He had thought it through, and the conclusion he reached was that Christine needed to die. He told Juliana this in October 2022. He told her he needed to get rid of his wife. And then he started planning. The plan had layers, and every layer shows you exactly how calculated this man was. First, he changed the windows in the house, had them upgraded for better soundproofing, so the neighbors would not hear what was coming. Then he walked the neighborhood, checked which houses had doorbell cameras, mapped out exactly who could see what, and from where. Then he and Juliana visited a shooting range, multiple times. In November, In December, he was teaching her how to shoot, training his au pair to fire a weapon, in the months before the murder. Then, in January 2023, he bought a gun, a separate firearm, not his government-issued service weapon, a new one. He gave it to Juliana, and then they built the trap. Christine Banfield had a laptop. She left it in her backpack by the door when she came home from work. While Christine slept, Brendan and Juliana took that laptop. They used it to create a profile on a website called FetLife, a social network for people interested in BDSM and fetish communities. They used Christine's photo, a picture of her in a one-piece bathing suit. They created an email address in Christine's name to register it. They posted from Christine's laptop, always while Christine was home, asleep, or in another room. Brendan had thought through the alibi. If investigators ever checked, the activity would trace back to Christine's devices, in her home. While she was there, they scrolled through users, looking for the right person. They rejected anyone who wanted to meet in public, anyone who wanted to meet at a hotel, anyone who had boundaries. They found Joseph Ryan. Joseph Ryan went by the username Taco Supreme 7 Cent. He was 39 years old. People who knew him described him as someone who respected boundaries, who was not violent, who was part of the FetLife community the way many adults are, privately, consensually, harming no one. He had no idea who Anastasia 9 really was. He thought he was talking to a woman named Christine who wanted to explore a fantasy in her own home. The messages escalated over weeks. Brendan, pretending to be Christine, arranged the scenario in explicit detail. Ryan would arrive in the morning. Christine would be asleep in bed. He should come straight upstairs. He should bring restraints and a knife. And this is the detail that stops you cold. He was told not to stop, even if she called for help. Those were the instructions that Brendan Banfield gave to the man he planned to murder. Joseph Ryan read those instructions, and he believed completely that he was fulfilling a fantasy for a willing adult woman who had invited him into her home. He had no idea he was being set up to be blamed for her death. The morning of February 24, 2023. Brendan Banfield left the house early, drove to a nearby McDonald's, ordered breakfast, and waited for his phone to ring. Juliana stayed home with their daughter and waited for Joseph Ryan to arrive. At some point that morning, an unfamiliar SUV pulled into the driveway. Juliana called Brendan. He left McDonald's, drove back to the house. Together, they put the 4-year-old girl in the basement, gave her a tablet, and went upstairs. What happened in that bedroom is the part that the prosecutor delivered to the jury in a single sentence that silenced the courtroom. Brendan enters the bedroom. First shoots Joe in the head, picks up the knife that Joe had brought, and stabs Christine repeatedly in the neck. He then directed Juliana to shoot Joe a second time with the gun he had given her that morning, to make sure she was implicated, to make sure she could not walk away without being part of it. Christine told Juliana to call 911. Juliana called, then hung up. Brendan was motioning to her to wait. She went to get towels. When she came back, she saw Brendan still stabbing his wife. Ryan moved. She shot him again. Then, and only then, Brendan gave the signal. Juliana called 911 for the third time, and this time, she stayed on the line. When police arrived, Brendan Banfield was on his knees in the bedroom with one hand on his dying wife's neck. He told them he had come home to find a man attacking Christine, that he had shot the intruder in self-defense using his government-issued firearm. Christine Banfield was rushed to hospital. She died from her injuries. Stabbed 7 times in the neck. Joseph Ryan was dead on a dog bed in the corner of the room. Shot twice. Framed for a murder he did not commit. Brendan Banfield poured some of Christine's blood onto Joseph Ryan's hands, left his gun safe open to make it look like he had grabbed his weapon spontaneously, and stood in his bedroom, playing the grieving husband, while investigators began processing the scene. For 8 months, nothing happened. Brendan Banfield continued living in that house. He attended Christine's funeral. He spoke about her publicly. And then investigators came back. In October 2023, 8 months after the murders, police executed a second search warrant on the Banfield home. What they found stopped them cold. Every photograph of Christine had been removed from the house. In the primary bedroom, the room where she had been murdered, A framed photograph of Brendan Banfield and Juliana Perez Magalhaes sat on the nightstand. Juliana's clothing was in the closet. Her lingerie was in the drawers. She had moved into the bedroom where Christine died. The detective who found it told 2020 Juliana had effectively replaced Christine. Juliana was arrested first, October 2023, charged with second-degree murder. For a year, she said nothing. Then Brendan was arrested, September 2024, and something shifted. Juliana gave investigators a 4-hour statement. She told them everything: the shooting range visits, the FetLife account, the instructions they sent to Joseph Ryan, the morning of the murders, what she saw Brendan do in that bedroom. She pleaded guilty to manslaughter in exchange for testifying against him. The detail that investigators found most chilling was in the digital forensics. Brendan and Juliana had been careful. They posted from Christine's laptop, only when Christine was home, only when her own devices were active, creating the illusion that Christine was running the account herself. But a forensic analyst found something. On February 20th, 2023, 4 days before the murders, Christine's laptop had logged into her work website at approximately 11:07 p.m. The analyst told the court, "We have gone from activity unrelated to the scheme to activity central to the scheme in a 24-second window." Christine had just finished checking her work emails, and in the time it takes to read a single sentence, someone else took that laptop and messaged Joseph Ryan. At trial, Brendan Banfield took the stand. He said the allegations were absolutely crazy. He said he loved Christine. He said he shot Joseph Ryan because he came home and found a man attacking his wife. He also admitted, while on the stand, that he had been having multiple affairs throughout their nearly 20-year marriage, including with Juliana, including with the woman he met on a sugar baby website in 2013. He said none of it was relevant to what happened that morning. The jury deliberated for 8.5 hours. Guilty on all counts. At sentencing, Christine's sister stood at the podium. She looked directly at Brendan Banfield and said, "He could have divorced and moved on, but divorce would have required relinquishing control, and control was always the priority." Joseph Ryan's mother appeared virtually. She was too unwell to attend in person. She said, "My son's life was used and thrown away, seen as worthless and utterly disposable. Disposal by those who plotted and executed his brutal murder." And then she said something that has stayed with everyone who heard it. "What I hope is that even for a moment, the world will say Joe meant more than nothing, that he was someone worthy of dignity in life, who did not deserve to be used and thrown away." Judge Penny Azcarate looked at Brendan Banfield and delivered the sentence. The level of cruelty, the calculation, the inhumanity. It reflects something far deeper than anger or impulse. It reflects evil, which is why I carry no burden and find no hesitation in sentencing you to life. Life in prison, no possibility of parole. In Virginia, where the death penalty no longer exists, it is the harshest sentence the law allows. His 4-year-old daughter was in that basement with a tablet while her mother was murdered upstairs. She will grow up knowing that. Joseph Ryan went to that house believing he had been invited, believing in consent, believing the messages were real. He brought a knife because he was asked to. He was shot in the head before he understood what was happening. He never got to tell his side, never got to explain, never got to defend himself. His username was Taco Supreme 7000. He was someone's son, someone's confidant, someone's cheerleader. And he was chosen, specifically, because Brendan Banfield believed he could be blamed for everything. But here is something that almost nobody has reported fully. When Brendan Banfield took the stand in his own defense, he did not deny the affairs. He admitted them. All of them. The sugar baby website. Juliana. Multiple others throughout the marriage. What he said instead was that Christine knew. He told the jury that both he and Christine had affairs throughout their nearly 20-year marriage, that they had decided to stay together anyway, that their marriage worked for them, even with the infidelity, that he loved Christine very much despite what people might think. He said, "Our marriage worked for us, It wasn't something that I looked to leave. And then he said something that silenced the courtroom. He told the jury that when the affair with Juliana began, he had told her directly there would be no relationship, that it was just an affair, that he had no intention of leaving Christine for her. So according to Brendan Banfield, he was not killing his wife to be with Juliana. He was killing his wife for the money and the custody of his daughter. And he was using Juliana, the same way he used Joseph Ryan, as a tool, as someone who could be manipulated into serving his purposes and left holding consequences he never intended to face himself. If that is true, it makes the crime even colder than prosecutors described. And then there is the detail about Juliana's letters from jail. While sitting in a cell waiting for her plea deal to be finalized, Juliana wrote letters to her family in Brazil. The defense obtained those letters, and at trial, Brendan's lawyer made her read one of them aloud in open court. In the letter, Juliana wrote that Netflix had offered her $10,000 for the exclusive rights to her story. She wrote, "I want a higher amount, especially since my whole life will be exposed to everyone, and they are going to be making a lot of money off of it. We deserve something." The defense used this to attack her credibility, to argue she was not cooperating because she felt guilty, but because she wanted money and attention. Juliana sat in that courtroom and read those words to a jury that was deciding whether to believe her, and the jury believed her anyway. There is also the question of what Brendan Banfield did the moment he was arrested. He was not arrested at his home. He was not arrested at work. He was pulled over in a traffic stop in Fairfax County in September 2024, a year and a half after the murders, and taken into custody right there on the side of the road. At his bond hearing, prosecutors argued he should be held without bail, not just because of the charges, but because of his daughter. They told the judge that Brendan Banfield was a danger to his own child, the child who had been in the basement with a tablet while her mother was murdered upstairs, the child who had grown up in a house where every photograph of her mother had been replaced with photographs of the woman who helped kill her. The judge agreed. He was denied bail, held without bond for the duration of the trial. His daughter, by the time of his conviction, had lost her mother to murder, her father to prison, and her caregiver to a 10-year sentence. She was 4 years old when it happened. She is now 7. And Christine's sister Danielle stood at that sentencing podium and told Brendan directly, "Your daughter will come to terms with the fact that you put her in harm's way." At sentencing, the judge said something that has stayed with people who were in that courtroom. She looked at Brendan Banfield and said, "One would hope that someday you will become tortured by what you have done to Christine, to Joe, to Christine's daughter, and to their families." Then she paused. "But nothing I have seen suggests that you will." That sentence, delivered by a judge who had sat through weeks of testimony, tells you everything about who Brendan Banfield is. Not a man who lost control, not a man who snapped, not a man driven by passion or fear or desperation. A man who planned, who calculated, who executed, and who showed no sign through the entire trial that any of it touched him. He appeared to cry once, when the 911 call from the morning Christine died was played in court. Whether those tears were real, only he knows. The judge did not believe they were, and Christine's daughter will grow up with questions that nobody will ever be able to answer for her. She will grow up knowing her father is in prison for killing her mother. She will grow up knowing that on the morning it happened, she was put in a basement with a tablet so the adults upstairs could do what they needed to do. She will grow up knowing that the woman she called her caregiver, the woman who took her to the zoo that morning, was part of the reason her mother never came home. Christine's friends have made a promise to keep her memory alive, to tell the little girl about who her mother was, about her laugh, about her dedication to the children she cared for at work. Lucille Priolo, Christine's childhood best friend, said after the verdict that Christine was honest, faithful, caring, compassionate, an angel on earth. That is what her daughter will be told about the woman she lost before she was old enough to remember her clearly. And that is the legacy Brendan Banfield created. Not just 2 murders, not just a life sentence. A little girl who will spend her entire life trying to understand what happened in that bedroom, and why. Subscribe to The Untold Case, because every case has a side the world never heard until now.